Yow, man! Welcome to the Frickcast, into some good old NFL history. Today we have the tale of the 1940s championship game that forever changed the NFL. The 1940s season was a very different time for the sport of football, and the National Football League looked much different than it does today. There was a team called the Brooklyn Dodgers, the Rams were in Cleveland, and the Pittsburgh Pirates had just rebranded to the Pittsburgh Steelers. This wasn't a time of high-volume, high-efficiency passing offenses. This was a time of big dick football. Offenses slamming the ball up the gut in the run game, and defenses looking to knock you back into the Great Depression. During the regular season, one of the most anticipated matchups was the late season game between the Chicago Bears and the Washington Redskins, now known as the Washington Commanders.
Gods, what a stupid name.
The game had 35,331 fans in attendance, a record for Washington at the time, and an amount the Commanders wish would show up to games today. The Bears scored first with an early field goal, and the Redskins would pass for a touchdown in the second to take a 7-3 lead. The game proved to be a low-scoring nail-biter, with the Bears still down by 4 late in the fourth quarter. Needing a touchdown, they prepared for a potential game-winning drive. From midfield, Bob Snyder launched a 30-yard pass to George McAfee, who managed to run it all the way down to the 1 before being tackled. It seemed Chicago was positioned to pull off the comeback, but a penalty and some incomplete passes left the visiting Bears with one shot at a game-winning touchdown. On the final play of the game, quarterback Sid Luckman launched a perfect pass to running back Bill Osmanski in the end zone. However, the defender wrapped his arms around Osmanski, holding down his hands so that the pass hit him in the chest and went incomplete. The refs, though, would not call a penalty for pass interference, much to the dismay of the Bears and their owner/head coach George Hollis, as 7-3 remained the final score. Hollis would publicly speak out about his disagreement with the controversial no call, but in the end, the Redskins won the day. While the narrow loss was bad enough, the Bears would get even more fuel for their vengeful fire. Washington's owner even back then was giving his own team problems. George Preston Marshall owned the Redskins since their inaugural season and is best known today as a staunch advocate for racial segregation in sports, and was the last owner to integrate, having to be forced by the federal government who funded the stadium to do so. Yeah, he was that kind of guy. After their 7-3 victory over Chicago, and with Hollis publicly condemning the no-call, Marshall would in turn call out the Bears as crybabies and as a first-half team. The already pissed-off Bear was poked once again and could not wait for its chance to strike back. Lucky for Chicago, their shot at redemption would come soon. These were widely regarded as the two best teams in the league, and with only 2 games remaining on the schedule, as well as a sizable lead in their respective divisions, it was pretty much guaranteed that the two teams would face off again. Remember, this was before the playoffs and the Super Bowl. The top team from the East and the top team from the West would play in the championship game following the regular season. So just 3 weeks after the 7-3 Redskins victory, the two powerhouse teams would meet once again in Washington. This would be the first time the two clubs would make the championship since 1937, when ironically, they faced each other. That year had been the Redskins' first in Washington, having relocated from Boston. By the time the fourth quarter rolled around, the Bears were up 21-14. However, a valiant effort from rookie quarterback Sammy Ball saw the Redskins score 2 late touchdowns to take the lead as well as the win. It had been 3 years since that championship game, and now the recent regular season loss to Washington is what really bothered Chicago. In preparation for the highly anticipated matchup, Hollis would bring in his close friend Clark Shaughnessy, the head coach of the Stanford Indians. Now that year, first-year head coach Shaughnessy had taken the college team that had finished 1-7-1 the year prior to a perfect 10-0 record and Rose Bowl victory. The insane turnaround was in large part due to the innovations Shaughnessy had made, including the revival of the offensive T formation, which would shake up both college and professional football. Now, the T formation was nothing new to the sport. It had been around since the beginning, but Shaughnessy would bring it back and tailor it to the modern game. This formation was pivotal in the development of the quarterback position, as it would see the quarterback receive the snap and from there either throw downfield or hand the ball off to a running back who was already moving. Clark Shaughnessy was a pioneer in the game, as he is sometimes called the father of the T formation and is often credited with popularizing the forward pass, making obsolete gimmick plays into not only a valid style of offense, but a dominant one. George Hollis was already known for using this formation. He had implemented it into his offense to be quarterbacked by Hall of Famer Sid Luckman. Shaughnessy had coached at the University of Chicago before Stanford, and while he was there, he was an advisor for the Bears, helping them to develop their offense. Hollis would bring him back for the championship game, and the two brilliant football minds would orchestrate a devious game plan, one that the Redskins would have little chance to stop. The 8-3 Chicago Bears traveled to the nation's capital to face the 9-2 Washington Redskins in front of a sellout crowd of over 36,000. Things started off perfectly for the Bears, as on their second play from scrimmage, running back Bill Osmanski broke outside and took the ball 68 yards to the house. It was now Washington's turn, and they managed to move the ball all the way down into Chicago territory. The Redskins quarterback, Sammy Baugh, a future Hall of Famer who had led the league in passing yards that year, spotted his boy in the end zone. He launched a perfect pass to wide receiver Charlie Malone. However, he dropped it. That touchdown would have tied the game, but now Washington had to settle for the field goal, which they missed. Things quickly went to shit for the Redskins after that, as the game didn't so much as get away from them, as it did file a restraining order against the team, change identities, and flee the country. The Bears got to work with the mauling of their opponent, and never looked back.
He's gone. He could go all the way. And then
that is a disgusting act.
Oh, here's a guy.
That is disgusting.
Shit, you have to get rid of this ball just a split second quicker. You'll see him here. He sees it. He knows he's got it.
Disgusting.
Oh, here's a guy.
No! No! No!
nice.
Down the middle, that ball is intercepted. Ha ha! Is he going to take it to the end zone? Ha ha!
Oh, here's a guy.
No!
That is disgusting.
No!
The fumble, rumbling, bumbling, stumbling the fumble.
Oh, good. And that is disgusting.
What are they doing?
No!
He's already dead.
Oh, here's a guy.
Game's over. Game is finally fucking be over.
And that is disgusting. And it's unfortunate that we had that on our air live.
The result would be an absolute dick-slapping, as the Bears beat the living god out of the Redskins, 73-0. Here are some quick details about this game. The Bears scored 11 touchdowns, 7 of those rushing, resulting in the most points scored by a single team in a game. 73-0 is the largest shutout and blowout in NFL history, and the score gap is the most in all major American sports. 80 years after the game, it was tied by the Memphis Grizzlies of the NBA, who beat the Oklahoma City Thunder by the same margin. While they avoided settling for field goals, the Bears kicked so many extra points into the stands that they were running out of footballs. It got to the point where the officials asked Chicago to throw or run for the point after attempt instead, which they did for their final 2 touchdowns, going 1 for 2. Washington threw 8 interceptions, with 3 of those being pick sixes in the third quarter. The 1940 championship is also the last game that featured a player who did not wear a helmet. Chicago's Dick Plosman had this honor. The Redskins were later asked about the game. Owner George Preston Marshall said that they needed 50 men to stop their power, and when quarterback Sammy Ball was questioned if the early dropped touchdown pass had been caught, would it have made a difference? Ball responded by saying that yeah, it would have made the final score 73-6. The final score looks like something you would see in Madden, yet it appeared at a time where offenses were not as high-powered as they are now. So how did they pull off something so outlandish that it has never been close to being replicated? Well, there's a few things to consider here. The Redskins were not a bad team. They were the second best that year. So how did they just completely fall apart even at home? From the beginning of the game, it was clear that the Bears' strategy was going to work to perfection. The Redskins were visibly confused by the motions and formations Chicago implemented, and while they did force some stops in the game, they weren't able to take advantage of them. Their use of the T formation proved incredibly effective, and the Redskins just did not have an answer for it. Early on in the game, Washington was able to move the ball. However, they could not score. Coupled with the fact that Chicago was meanwhile building a sizable lead, the Redskins were forced into desperation mode early, and the highly aggressive defense of the Bears was able to make plays of their own. The Bears took the momentum early and never surrendered it. They also sort of ran the score up. They were going for touchdowns late and even lateraled the ball on a late interception. So in many ways, the final score was the result of a perfect storm, and it's unlikely the stars will align for such a performance again. This victory in 1940 kicked off Chicago's legendary run as the original Monsters of the Midway, where the Bears continued to play their brand of Big Dick football. In this span, under owner and head coach George Hollis and legendary quarterback Sid Luckman, the Bears appeared in 5 championships and won 4 of them, in large part due to their innovative strategies. This era would also see the rivalry between the Bears and Redskins continue, as they would yet again meet several times, including twice more in the championship game. In the 1942 chip, the 11-0 Bears faced the 10-1 Redskins on the same field they had embarrassed them on just 2 years earlier. This time, however, things would play out differently. The first points of the game wouldn't come until the second quarter, when Chicago returned a fumble for a touchdown, although they missed the extra point. Washington, however, would respond quickly with a touchdown of their own, and then later seal the game with another. The Redskins would get their revenge and spoil Chicago's perfect season. The following year would once again see the two powerhouses meet in the championship, and this time it would be a much higher scoring affair. Washington would score first, but after that it was all Chicago, as the Bears came out on top, 41-21. The rivalry between these two teams is mostly forgotten today, but had a lasting impact on the sport we now know. The 1940 championship is the most one-sided game in the history of the NFL, and I would argue it's one of its greatest revenge games as well. Still, these teams did not stop exchanging vengeful blows in the 40s, as the two franchises have a knack for getting in one another's way. Over the following decades and into the Super Bowl era, each team has had its times of success, fielding record-breaking teams and winning Super Bowls, with most of their success coming in the 1980s. Washington won their first Super Bowl in 1983, while Chicago won theirs in '85. That historic Bears team is considered one of the greatest of all time. Now, after their chips, each team remained competitors every year. The following season, in 1986, the Redskins actually knocked off the Bears in the divisional round, 27-13. However, they themselves got shut out in the NFC Championship game by the eventual champion, New York Giants. However, the next season would prove much more consequential. In the 1987 divisional round, the Washington Redskins came to town again to take on the Chicago Bears. On the Bears side, there was a bit of turmoil. This season saw players strike across the league, with starters sitting out several games, and this forced head coach Mike Ditka to bring in replacement players for part of the season, or spare bears, including undrafted quarterback Sean Payton. Ditka didn't support the protests, which hurt his reputation, and he further soured his relationship with his starting quarterback, Jim McMahon, as the team selected the intriguing first-round quarterback prospect out of Michigan, Jim Harbaugh. However, McMahon would wind up starting most of the shortened season, as well as the playoffs. Furthermore, superstar Walter Payton looked for one last Super Bowl run. On the Redskins side, they too dealt with the player strike, as well as a quarterback carousel. Starter Jay Schrader was injured in Week 1 and was never able to fully recover that season. The team was also forced to bring in and start several replacement quarterbacks, including Ed Rubbert, who actually played very well and won 2 games. However, he got hurt in a 3rd game and was replaced by replacement quarterback Tony Robinson, who won the game. The Redskins quarterback situation, specifically the replacement quarterbacks, was the inspiration for the film The Replacements, starring the man, the myth, the boy, Keanu Reeves. By the time the playoffs rolled around, the regular starters were back, and Washington chose to go with their original backup quarterback, Doug Williams. Williams was a longtime veteran who had seen success starting for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers back in their early, ungodly years, as well as in the upstart USFL. As a Redskin, he won the games he relieved the starter in, but lost the games he actually started. Now Washington would face their old nemesis, the Chicago Bears, who looked to avoid the same fate they had suffered the year before. A back-and-forth slugfest, with each team playing sloppy at times and making mistake after mistake, would see the game tied 14-14 in the 3rd, and then this happened.